Hello, viewers, and welcome to EDUPATH, the journey of success, a live series of interviews brought to you by expert group of institutions Alumni Association. Success isn't always about greatness, it's about consistency. Consistent hard work always leads to success. Greatness will follow. Our guest today is a living example of consistency leading to success. I'm happy to welcome Professor Greg Page to EDUPATH. Hello and welcome. You have a very impressive profile, but let me try to quickly introduce you to our viewers. Professor Gregory Page is a senior lecturer of administrative sciences at the Boston University Metropolitan College and also the director of BU Met military programs at the Hanscom Air Force Base in Lexington, Massachusetts. He holds degrees from what we can call the holy trinity of higher education, that is, Stanford University, Harvard University, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that is MIT. He has served in the United States Navy as an intelligence officer, where he developed target packages resulting in the detention of more than 200 wanted individuals, including some of the most wanted insurgents in Anbar province, Iraq. He was rated by Admiral Bruce Grooms as the absolute number one performing junior intelligence officer I have seen in 28 years of service. As a tactical intelligence officer in Task Force Yankee based out of Kabul, Afghanistan, continuing his military service, he is currently a major in the United States Army Reserve Strategic Intelligence Detachment. He has worked in various other academic roles, in addition to having worked as the Chief of Staff for the Office of the Mayor of Lowell, Massachusetts. We are extremely, I would say, proud and grateful that you have agreed to be a part of this program. Welcome to you once again.
Well, Ankush, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here and to get the chance to chat with you and your students this morning
Right.
or this evening.
Yeah, it's evening here. I want to start off by asking you, what was your childhood like? Because growing up, uh, how did you deal with the dilemma that everyone faces of what do I want to be? And at what point did you decide, okay, this is what I want to become?
Mhm. So I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in a suburb, probably about 25 miles west of New York City. And I, like a lot of kids, grew up very interested in sports. So
Hmm.
if you asked me when I was probably until I was about maybe 14 or 15, I was convinced I wanted to be an NBA
Okay.
basketball player. But I think I learned, reality sunk in around that time, and I turned towards a much stronger focus on school. And so I just kind of explored everything and enjoyed all the subjects in school, but kept finding my way as I went, and I took a few different paths along that way. So when I started college, I thought maybe I'll go to law school
Hmm.
someday, and then I got interested in teaching. I took a big detour after 9/11. 9/11 was my senior year of
Hmm.
college, and that really pulled me away and got me into stuff.
Hmm.
And then I think I really came back full circle being into teaching now.
Right, that's wonderful. Now, we were talking about your education and how you took, different paths to reach where you are today. Now, most students dream of getting into Stanford or Harvard or MIT. I stress on or because you went to all three. So, how did you make this happen?
Well, it's a little bit of circumstance that the way that all lined up. I definitely didn't plan that to happen, but for college, I hadn't seen much beyond the East Coast of the
Hmm.
US at the time. And so I saw the opportunity to just look elsewhere and see other things. So I thought about schools in California, Stanford, Berkeley, LA, and then also schools in Texas like Rice, and even schools in the
Hmm.
South, because I just knew I just wanted to see
Right.
something new and interesting and exciting. And so that took me out west, and I was fortunate to get into Stanford and to do that. And then when I in the summer between my junior and senior year of college, I did a program where I got a chance to teach in a school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and that got me. That was sort of my path towards coming back east,
Hmm.
and I did the master's degree in the ed school, the School of
Right.
Education at
Harvard.
Harvard,
Hmm.
and then came back to business school much later.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I've visited all three of these institutions. So they're all beautiful places. I mean, Stanford has its own beauty being on the West Coast, and I was in Arizona, so it's nearby. But and then Harvard and MIT are beautiful. It was raining on the day we visited Harvard, but I've only visited them, and I think the environment that the university provides is something that contributes a lot to the kind of education and your academic experience in the university. So, talking about your student life and now as a teacher, because you deal with a lot of students, how important do you think is planning and preparation for a student? Is it just better to go with the flow and take on challenges as they come, or do planning and preparation give a definite advantage to any student?
I think it's definitely a mix. I
Hmm.
think for individual courses, you want to be prepared. You want to plan your way through. But I'm thinking maybe at the tactical level of how you would approach a particular course you're enrolled in. But as far as your life trajectory, I think students should actually balance those things. And I think students should always keep an open mind in terms of what they might want to do and in terms of how open they are to changing
Right.
their path.
Hmm.
And I'll mention I'm reading a book right now. I'll actually show the book because it's
Yeah, yeah,
sitting next
sure.
to my desk. And this book, it's an excellent book that I strongly recommend. And so hopefully that title
Yes,
and
bad
the
blood. Yep.
description is coming through here.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so it's about someone who actually is just a couple years younger than me, who was a student at Stanford, and she was her name is Elizabeth Holmes, and she was so focused on becoming a billionaire and in having breakthrough medical technology to support that that she did she did become at least on paper a billionaire, and she started a company where a lot of ethical corners were
Yes, yes.
cut. She's now awaiting
Yes,
trial.
I've
So
heard of this
so
story. Yes, I have.
so for an extreme example, but you have, but for
Right,
all your students,
right.
if they don't know that story, I just want to say that it's good to be focused, but there's an extreme, and that extreme can actually go the wrong
Hmm.
way
Hmm.
sometimes. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so I
no,
think it's as you said, it's important to have a mix of being prepared for what is to come, but also making sure that you have the flexibility to uh, diverge or change paths or take a detour whenever you want to. And as you said, you took a lot of detours on the way here. So now, as I went through your profile, I found out that you have coached students preparing for exams like GRE and GMAT, etc. So, what is the importance of coaching and tutoring for a student who plans on writing a competitive exam?
I think it can help a lot because what a student is getting with a coach or a tutor is someone who can help keep them on pace and give them a plan and the same way a personal trainer might knock on someone's door and have them go run. A
Right.
coach or a tutor is going to say, okay, it's time to do these exercises, and I'm going to check in with you. The coach or tutor also has some of the things that are going to lead to success, because especially someone who's had a lot of experience tutoring is going to be able to identify these are the things that can help you really get to the root of such a problem. So I think that can be really helpful for students. It also gave me a really interesting vantage point to see the types of students that are going to succeed,
Right.
and the ones that will not, the ones that will just sort of run in place and
Hmm.
not actually make those big
Hmm.
strides.
Hmm.
And so what I found is that students who are just looking for shortcuts, students who are so focused on the answer,
Hmm.
they don't even want to know how to get there,
Hmm.
they will just get the same score every time.
Hmm.
The ones, and I've had students go from a 620 to a 740. I had students get 770, 780, which are really phenomenal GMAT scores. Those are the students that are willing to put the time in to really understand the
Right.
questions and the answer.
Hmm. So yeah, it's important to know the how and why and not just the answer.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of students in our institution preparing for the medical entrance exams, which are very, very competitive. There are about, I would say, about 1.5 million people who write this exam every year, and also the engineering entrance exams, and it's very important to make them or channelize what they're studying in the right direction so that they're not just all over the place. So I think that's a very nice opinion that you have. Now, we have a question from a viewer. So before we continue, I want to just remind our viewers that you can send in your questions for today's guest live by WhatsApp. The numbers displayed on your screen, that is 82964901168. If you're not from India, make sure you have the correct country code, that is +91. And we already have a question from a viewer, Michael Saldana from Bangalore, asks, nice to see you and your motivating words on Expert EDUPATH. I'm curious to know, which did you enjoy the most out of Stanford, Harvard, and MIT? Which did you enjoy the most?
Well, so I will say that the two that I would say that are at the top would be Stanford and
Hmm.
MIT. And I say that, everyone's experience is going to vary.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to have their own way they go through higher ed. But
Hmm.
with both Stanford and MIT, there's a real spirit and energy
Mm.
of you can do anything, and people are very collaborative and very open to
Mhm.
to new ideas. And that is probably also true at Harvard, but I just my experience with it was just a little bit. It was just not quite the same as the
Right,
Stanford MIT
right.
experience.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, of course, every student will have their own personal experiences, but it's good to listen to your experience. Now, as a professor with several years of experience in teaching, what do you think are the unique challenges that students of the current generation face as compared to, say, a decade ago?
So the challenge. So first, one of the benefits that students have is there are more tools available to you now than existed in
Hmm.
certainly in my time as a student. So if you go back, I mean, I graduated college in 2002. So although sometimes it doesn't feel that long ago, there was no
Right.
YouTube. So I didn't have. I mean, I only wish I had Khan Academy as a high school
Right.
student and as a college student. I didn't. And there's also a lot of resources that are available where you could find examples of old assignments with solutions. And I think that's okay. And I don't want to fight that or stop
Hmm.
that because I think it's natural that websites are going to do that. But the problem, though, that creates, or the challenge it creates, is when students use that not as a resource but as what they think is a solution. I get some situations where I'm changing up questions every semester, and I'm noticing some of the answers I'm seeing are from the previous prompt of the assignment. So I'm thinking, okay, you got to put in a little more work than that. And so you have to use those things. You absolutely should, but you have to really make sure you're using those kinds of tools the right way.
Right. Talking about newer tools and technologies, so we have the student's perspective, but other than the adoption of newer technologies, do you feel there's a need for teachers to evolve? How do teachers stay relevant?
One of the ways teachers have to evolve is, speaking of these sites where you can find
Hmm.
assignments and even old quizzes and things like that. What teachers have to say is, okay, I'm not going to stand in front of a tidal wave and try to stop it from hitting, because it
Right.
will. What instead, teachers have to adapt and evolve, and teachers just have to change things as they go. So we can't fall into the trap of being lazy and just reusing things again and again and again that might have worked in a previous generation, but it's just not going to work now. And so I think if we can do that, we can stay relevant, and we can continue to
Right.
add unique value.
Hmm.
Another thing I'll say that instructors can do, and this would be true. This would be true anytime, but it's been very true over the past year with the pandemic situation, is that teachers can offer live Q&A opportunities. And that's really important. And that's something that's really not replaceable
Right.
by a massive open online course
Hmm.
or just by some static website, because especially in my field, which is data science, there's a lot of statistics and a lot of coding that play into
Mm.
this. And so live troubleshooting, live Q&A can often cut to the heart of some issue in a way that really wouldn't be doable in any kind of automated, mass-produced way, or even via email.
Right. I think that's become even more relevant in the pandemic because as classes went online, both teachers and students had to rapidly uh, adopt new technologies, new methods of teaching and learning, and especially in countries like India, where there is not a lot of access to good internet or good online resources because a majority of India is still very rural. There's a lack of good internet access, and many of them do not even have like laptops or PCs, and they just have this small phone that might not really support a lot of technology. But I think it's become even more relevant that uh, both students and teachers have had to adopt and adapt, I would say, because uh, now, what do you think this has this impacted students' ability to learn? The pandemic that we have just had. So there are a lot of studies that say that it's led to decreased learning capacity, or that there are developmental skills that might not be as effectively imparted using online technologies. So what do you think that this pandemic has, how has it affected education?
Well, it's been tough. So the challenges that students that weren't the same years ago are the number of distractions. I mean, students have been distracted since since Aristotle had a school garden somewhere. But students have more temptation now. There's all these different things around them, and the solutions to those challenges aren't always very simple. So someone could say, "Oh, well, you could just make all your students turn on webcams," but I actually don't think that that's the right answer either,
Mm,
because I think it's an unrealistic expectation that students for 2.5 hours, which is the length of a lot of our courses that meet the ones that meet once a week, to expect students to be sort of on and to
right.
have the webcam on and to have their Zoom face
Yeah,
on. I think it's tough. I'd rather let students just focus on the material,
correct.
but I think definitely it's tougher. I think there are barriers that wouldn't exist if we were in a face-to-face environment. So I'll just say that I'm very much looking forward to the return to normal, which I hope is coming by the fall.
All right. So we have a few more viewer questions coming in. So there are a couple of questions that are kind of related. So I'll try to ask them together. So there's one question from Harsha from Goa. So he asked, did you prepare for any exams to get into these top universities? Or do all American kids get a chance to study there? That's one question. And the second question from Rajesh from Chennai is, you're a citizen of the United States, and as such, was it easier for you to get into these big universities? What about those who are from, say, India, and we have a dream to at least do our masters from these big universities? So I think they're kind of related to, do Americans have an advantage to get into these universities? And second, how did you prepare to get into these universities?
What I'll say is that yes. So for the exams, I did you did have to do that, and what I'll say is that there's something good about that, because without that system in place, I have no idea how the universities would even begin to
Right.
sort out the applicants.
Mhm.
So the common misperception with these exams is that if you if you deserve it more, like if you have a 790 and your friend has a 770, then you should get in and your friend shouldn't. That's actually not how it works. but they can use the exams as sort of a bar to clear. So they could say, okay, what we're going to do is everyone above this whatever number, we're going to say, okay, you're over here now. The people that are below that or significantly below that maybe aren't going to get that chance. But once you clear that bar, everyone's really the same. So someone with a 720 and someone with a 780 really might be the same in the eyes of the people reading those. But those exams, what's and what actually is somewhat of a democratizing aspect of those is that the tools to prepare for those are widespread and distributed. Right. A really high score is a way to signal, look at me, I'm here. Whereas if you didn't have that, it might just be more of and what they used to call the old boys network, which is how university admissions worked. Maybe more than 50, maybe almost 100 years ago in the US, there was a very small number of elite private high schools, and they would just call up. They would just call up Princeton, Yale, and say, "I'm going to send you 12 of my boys," and they were all boys then. The schools weren't co-ed. That's literally how it worked. Right. So yes and yes, and so I found in all those cases, I was never somebody that just woke up one day and just knew it all. So a lot of the people that tell you that are lying. The people that say, "Oh, I just went in, no preparation, and I wrote the test and I crushed it." I did have to prepare a lot, and I used the official old exams. And what I would do is when I made a mistake, I would actually look and say, why? What did I not know? Why did I make that mistake? And then went in, didn't have perfect scores, but my scores were all in the 99th plus percentile, and it was enough to do that. So yes and yes, and I think that any chance that any of you have to use those as a strength, you will and you should. And so I will say, though, but that does tie to the next question because it is tougher. And so there are definitely a lot of international students at all of those schools and many more. But I do think that all else equal, I think sometimes it feels like it might be an expectation that people would have, especially perfect quantitative scores. And that may, I mean, the schools are going to use the process they're going to use. But I do think that it is certainly tougher. And the financial aid situation is also more challenging because there's less opportunity for international students there as well. But I will say that for anyone who's out there who's thinking that your dream or your goal is to attend at a master's level, any of those schools or schools like them, there are a lot of different programs and a lot of different degree programs that all those schools offer. So there's a lot of ways to slice that. These ways tend to grow. So even if you look at a place like MIT Sloan is the business school for MIT. It's not just the MBA. They have the Masters in Finance. They just launched a Masters in Analytics, which is interesting to me. I'm teaching that at BU. But there's many opportunities. So it really is. It is very possible, and it's like a whole other round. Once you've gone through the bachelor's level and you've worked a little bit, it's something that people do all the time.
So changing lanes to your time in the military. So I just want to ask, why did you decide to join the military? So how did you become a military intelligence officer, and why do you work in the field, in that field?
So yeah, it was definitely not something I was thinking about, before my senior year of college. And so with September 11th, which I know folks are what that is, and I know I have to remember though how much younger some of the listeners are, and it's something they've read about but don't remember it the same way others of us do. That definitely it impacted me. Thank goodness he's completely fine now. But my dad worked at Morgan Stanley in the World Trade Center. Okay. Yeah, so I literally watched a plane hit almost exactly his floor of the building directly. Yeah, and so now he was okay. He was coming into work, and so he left. I mean, he'd been through this in '93. So in '93 there was an attempt. Well, there was a bombing. I shouldn't say an attempt. But he came out then. covered in soot. So he came home like looking a different way. In '01, he came home gray. He was just covered in gray, and that was the dust. And so that experience, it wasn't something where I went like the next day to the recruiter and I'm going to become an Army Ranger,
Yes.
and it wasn't really like that. It took a long time. I went all the way west, and I realized how some people there didn't think of it the same way, and maybe had different opinions about it, and that things just formed with me. And I had at one point said I'm going to join the reserve and I'll just do something else full time. And then I realized, well, if I do that, I'm going to end up deployed anyway. So with Intel, that was a little bit of self-awareness, because I had to just be honest and say, I don't think I'm a SEAL. I just, some people are going to be a SEAL. It's not everybody. And I just think that it's not maybe what I'm cut out for, but I think I could do something great. I think I could be an Intel officer, and I could actually help in contribute using my strengths. And that's what I did. That drove me there. And it was a roundabout path, but I got there eventually.
Yeah, so generally when we think of the military, there's a tendency to associate that with, say, brute physical strength and less with intelligent work. So what is the role of brains in the military?
So, okay, it's a big deal. And I'm glad you asked, because I think that it's something that is important. And it's important in not just in the US, but in
Yes.
militaries around the world, is that the role of brains is you can think about things like planning, and think about things like operational and logistics planning, as well as intelligence, meaning your understanding of what's the situation regarding your forces and potential adversaries, and you're using your wits to answer those kinds of questions. Whether it's, okay, where is this person who's being sought after by U.S. and Iraqi forces in Western Iraq, or whether it's some other similar situation somewhere in the world. There are a lot of tools that are used to collect information, but you still need people that can actually put all those things together. And those people, I mean, that's analytical skills, that's thinking skills, and it can be really rewarding work when people apply those things to those problems.
Right. So we have a question that I feel is very relevant here. Shashikant from Udupi asks, we want to hear about your experience as an intelligence officer. Can you share a unique incident that you will remember for your lifetime?
Sure. Okay. So definitely. And what I'll say there is, it's rather than it's sort of an experience, but there's a lot of incidents that feed into it. But we have certain strengths when we're deployed overseas. We have access to satellites and to these we would say UAV, and others might say drone, but I'm saying unmanned aerial vehicle. Yeah, exactly. We have these big things in the sky that we could be monitoring a house or some location. So we have that, but what the local forces have is a lot more awareness of the actual situation in the neighborhoods and the streets. And so what I was able to do was to partner up with the police force in Fallujah. This was Fallujah in 2006. This was 2 years after the huge fight with the Marines and the insurgents there. But what I would do is just go meet with these guys, and we could use open source tools, things like Google Maps, and we could say, okay, there's certain things we can and cannot share, but the things we can share with them, they would just open up. And so we'd say, oh, we're looking for this guy because we think, well, we have reason to believe he's facilitating weapons and money, and it's coming across the desert through Jordan, and he's holding it as he's using his home to distribute this, and it's causing these attacks. The attacks, by the way, are against the local police. They're getting this much worse than us. Right. Oh yeah, so the police are very much with us. So we have a shared interest. They may not be glad we're there, but they really want to get security in their city. So they would then say, oh, that guy, oh, I talked to them. Oh, we know that guy. That guy, yeah, we know how to get him, and we know his family, and we can reach out. And so we would then basically marry up our strengths with their information, and then we would plan these operations. And this is where I'm not. This is where I don't have that moment of glory. I'm not the person who's kicking down the door. I'm not even the person who's actually on the target. I'm
Right.
not. I'm just doing this all from their
Mhm.
headquarters. But these guys would go out with U.S. forces and the Iraqis, and they would go and detain these guys. And sure enough, they'd find all these things at the locations.
Right.
So that
Mhm.
experience is very memorable and rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, I think what you do behind the scenes plays an important role, which ties up to what I wanted to ask you next. What is the role of good intelligence in a military operation? Is there something like good and bad intelligence? What can be the consequences of good and bad intelligence?
So the consequences of intelligence is when the commander is the decision maker. The
Hmm.
intel officer is never the person who controls the operational decision. But good intelligence can pump the brakes on what would be a bad decision.
Hmm.
So intelligence can you can vet the source and you can assess the quality of something you're seeing. So a lot of times people just see a report and they get really excited. So there was a time when one of the people that was one of the insurgent facilitators that was being looked for was this guy Abu Abdullah. They call him Abu Abdullah One
Hmm.
Arm because he really had just
Okay.
one arm. He lost part of his arm in a boyhood. It was actually a
Hmm.
farming accident, but so any of these reports get everybody really pumped up. He's sort of like the mini Bin
Hmm.
Laden of our little. And so some of the times you'd see these things come through, and I would look at it, and there's certain things you can see in the report about who the source is and whether the source is credible or has a track record. And so anytime his name came up, these people would call our unit and say, okay, hey, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And a lot of times I'd be talking to my commander and saying, I don't think we should
Hmm.
go. And then he would believe me. He got to know me and to trust me over the months that we spent out there. And he's like, look, if Paige says we're not going, we're not going. And he could have overruled me, but oftentimes people don't the people who are pressuring us, they're not intel people. They're seeing it and thinking, hey, go, go, go. And what often happens is the blunt truth is these sources they're giving information because it's a chance for them to get paid or to who knows why they're telling that to people. But we can't just go jumping on every single report. So a good intelligence officer can say, look, am I going to risk the
Right.
lives of am I going to send a platoon of SEALs go chasing some guy that is probably through some location that it could be an
Hmm.
ambush, it could be a trap. We're not going. And even if sometimes even the guys, what I mean by that is the operational guys would say, "Oh, intel, there's a lot of bad language I won't repeat on this call." They would say,
Right.
certain words, and I can't believe you stopped our operation. I said, "Well, I'm not going to apologize. It's bad intel. We're not
Right,
going."
right, right. So
So
it's a very risky job because you have a lot riding on the inputs that you provide. Generally, our perception of intelligence is from Hollywood movies, I would say. So there are a lot of movies, and especially with spies and all of that. Now, how is the intelligence community different from the movies? So, what's the real uh, I mean, you were an intelligence officer, so how was your experience different from what we generally see in the movies?
first I'll say that in some ways it's similar. So
Mm,
so if you some movies I feel like some movies get this right. And
mm,
there's a movie that I saw where I was like, okay, that is I think it was Act of Valor. And
mm,
they have the officer who's briefing the team and saying this is where you're going, this is why it is, this is where they have all the satellite
mhm,
shots of the target. And I thought, oh, okay, that's pretty good. So those parts are good, but I think what the movies would miss is the drudgery of it. The movies are going to show the excitement, but not everything else. And so a lot of it is some of it is just all the coordination that you're doing to set something up, and it's almost like you're running a campaign because there's all these different units that have different pieces of the puzzle, and when you just talk to people you'd be amazed what comes out. so there's talking to a group of Marines who are looking at a certain area, and they say, "Oh, we think we know where so and so is." Oh, really? Okay, well, let's talk about that. Right? I can't
Right.
believe you just. When were you going to tell me? But you just get, it's a lot of relationships. I think that's what movies might not always get, is that there's the high tech side, but there's also this very much chatting,
The
standing,
human
talking.
touch to it, yeah.
Yes, where a lot of things come together, and it's the ability to fuse all that together is what really makes the magic happen.
We have another question from a viewer, Winston. He asks, how was your experience in Afghanistan? Because we see a lot of this only in Hollywood movies. Can you tell us about your life experience in Afghanistan?
Certainly, and I would say that it's what's different. So my unit deployed to Kabul,
Hmm.
which as you all know is the
Capital.
capital
Hmm.
city, and it's yeah, and it's not the mountains. You know, when you imagine, when you think about or you see movies about U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan in the mountains that separate Afghanistan and
Pakistan.
Pakistan, you know that that's a whole different
Right.
world, and I am thankful that that was not my world, because that's a yeah, that's there's some brutal,
Hmm.
it's just some really brutal terrain and some tough stuff they're dealing with. So in the city was semi permissive drive around. We could even walk around. We could go
Mm.
out and stop and literally pull over and order some food and put it back in the Humvee. So those sorts of things we could do, but there were periodic instances of what are called spectacular attacks. So it would be there were it was there's a lot of high value targets inside of Kabul. So we definitely dealt with the periodic issues that would come up
Hmm.
around that, and that was certainly
Right.
tough. But also this one of the things that was similar was the coordination. So we often were out there talking to the embassy, talking to other international partner units, and then also even just gathering information from people about things going on in the city. So it was rewarding in that sense. Our unit published like a daily intelligence report that went out to all of those
Hmm.
partners.
So how important is international collaboration and cooperation? Because at the end, I think the objective of all of this, although it does look a lot of like a lot of violence, but the objective, the end objective is to have peace and security. So how important is the cooperation between different countries towards this common objective of peace?
So it's absolutely essential, because there has to be buy-in among the regional players, and it can be a challenge to accomplish that. There's also there's that level of what's Afghanistan really going to
Hmm.
look like, and who's going to have a stake in the way that develops. And there's complications, as there's issues, there's a lot of strategic questions, even questions that involve India
Right,
and
right.
Pakistan about yeah, yes, very much, very sensitive stuff, very very high.
Yeah.
But also at our level, thankfully, I'm down at the tactical
Hmm.
level here, and it's in our case, it's we have Canadians, we have French, we have Turkish, we have all these different militaries that we have to communicate with,
Hmm.
and we have to respect, and we have to learn how to talk to them, and how to ensure that we're sharing what we're seeing, and we're also getting things from them, and that was a really interesting takeaway from that whole experience. NATO NATO never invoked. So Article 5 of NATO is if NATO member is attacked, this is what's going to happen.
Hmm.
Where that really has actually happened was September 11th,
Hmm.
and so that's an example of all those NATO
Right.
players on the same battlefield together.
Right. So now, I think to sum this up regarding your experience in the military, how has this experience of you being in the military, of you having served in both Iraq and Afghanistan, how has this changed you as a person?
I think that it impacts me in terms of how I approach everything I do. And I think the experiences of seeing the professionalism of military people, and seeing the types of day they put in to their job, I mean, the work ethic, I think absolutely rubs off on me, and it impacts me with what I do, even teaching, which seems very, those two things seem very different, but I bring that same mentality to preparing for classes and preparing assignments and interacting with students. So I think the sort of the dedication and the
Right.
importance of just doing something right absolutely matters to me every day.
Right. So, as a student, right? So, what is the role of being disciplined and, having the determination, dedication, and a kind of self-discipline that, okay, I have to work like this. And because creating good habits, maintaining good habits is more difficult than just starting to do something, right? So,
Yes.
how does a student maintain that consistency and determination towards their goal?
I think that for students, you have to be tough on yourself. But I want to say what I mean by that, because it doesn't mean you just you say things because you think that's what people want to hear or you're supposed to say. So being tough on yourself doesn't mean, oh, I'm not going to be good at calculus, or I'm not going to pass the IB or the AP, or whatever exam you're preparing for. Okay, that's not being tough. That's just saying words. Being tough on yourself is holding yourself accountable and saying to yourself, do I really know this? And if you don't, if you go to class and you listen to a lecture and you walk away saying, I'm not sure if I got that whole lesson on binary numbers. I heard 0 and 1 a lot of times, but I'm not sure I got anything past that. Okay, that's okay. That's part of being a student, is you're exposed to something new, and you're not sure what it is. But then what you owe is you have to then say, I'm going to go back on my own and I'm going to know it. And I'm not going to just say, oh, I'm good, until I
Right.
know that I'm good and I've
Mm.
held myself accountable. So that's something that students have to do. And I think it's very tempting and very easy for us just to open the book and say, okay. We don't want to do that. So,
Right.
so be, so, yeah, be tough in that sense. And then also be willing to revisit things. So it's easy to say, okay, yeah, I know that. But do you really? And so go back through and even watch something on a basic level. Find a tutorial on YouTube or find some text somewhere, and challenge yourself to go back through the simple examples. And if you look at someone who's world class, if you look at a world class musician at Carnegie Hall, or you look at a world class athlete like Tom Brady, what are they doing? They're doing all the basic things over and
Again.
over and
Hmm.
over. They don't just walk away from that ever.
Mm. So it's
So that's
yeah,
a big
it's
deal.
important to practice and keep doing the basic things and make sure that you make it a habit, right? Developing good
Yeah,
habits is
make it a habit.
yes.
Yes, and check yourself,
Hmm.
and really don't let yourself off easy to
Right,
say you know
right.
it until you're sure
Sure,
you do.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, coming to your fields of research and academics, so we hear these terms big data and machine learning a lot these days. What do they mean, and how are these relevant to a common person?
So the big things I would say are that when you hear the term machine learning, I want you to think statistical
Mm,
learning. And so I want to contrast what is and what isn't machine learning. If we were trying to model something, suppose we want to model what is the expected salary of an NBA basketball player. Okay, what we could do is we could just sit around and talk, and we could say, I think points per game should matter. And you could say, well, I think block shots should
mm,
matter. And we'll say, I think rebounds should matter. And if we just talked and we just made up a bunch of weights to each of these variables and we built a model ourselves, well, that would just be us making it up and what we
right.
think. But alternatively, if we could take all of the statistics that we could obtain, we could use statistical software. It doesn't matter what we use. We could do it in Python,
All
R,
right.
you could do it in Excel
Mm-hmm.
or SAS or whatever. So we do this, and we then interpret the coefficients and the statistical significance scores, and we actually learn, and we say, okay, these turns out some of these things aren't so important. Some of them are, and then we use that. Once we've done that, which does involve some human assessment of
Mm-hmm.
what we would see, then we could build a model that could instantly generate other predictions without requiring more human input. And that whole process is machine learning. So it impacts us in many ways. Think about one way we could imagine is going to, I'm still kind of amazed, when I deposit a check on my phone or on an ATM, how does it know? It's doing optical character
Yes.
recognition. How do they know the amount? I just wrote it. But that's a machine learning
Right.
problem, because sometimes sevens look like
Right.
ones, sometimes eights look like threes. But once you train an algorithm enough times to spot the differences, you can actually get that automated result.
Right. So speaking about data, because of course, I think the input for machine learning is a lot of statistical data, and then of course the extension would be something like artificial intelligence that makes decisions based on whatever it has learned. But now, speaking about data, there's an ongoing global debate about data privacy. Europe has gone all the way with GDPR, while other countries are still figuring out the best way to balance data privacy with the need to also preemptively detect and act on threats to national security without turning the whole thing into a mass surveillance program, right? So there's also the worry that big companies will misuse user data. Where do you think the balance lies, and how can we work towards a practical solution to this problem?
So that is a tough question, because, as you said, this question is being answered so differently in different jurisdictions, and the internet itself is not something built around the idea of jurisdictions, right? It's
It's
the
free and
free
open, yeah.
transfer of, yes, exactly. They don't know borders, these packets. So it's challenging, and there are a lot of questions about the implications that come from data collection done by corporations that are not restricted by the same legal sorts of things, like there's no bill
Oh,
of
yes.
rights
Hmm.
in the US. Yeah, but yeah, there's a bill of rights that gives citizens rights from the
Hmm.
government, but not from
Yeah.
Google or
Yeah.
Facebook. So it's going to, this question is something that will just keep evolving throughout our lifetimes, but it's something that we should be aware of, because it's very easy to say, well, I don't care because I have nothing to hide. People say that a lot, but that won't always work. When you might end up in a situation where a company knows something about your medical past, or about something in your, maybe even in your, just in your family's
Hmm.
medical past, that you might not want to share, and that can be inadvertently spilled, and then you would care. And so it's something that we should be aware of. And there's always the companies that provide services are going to say, look, we bring all these wonderful services to people around the world, and we do it in part, or in large part, because we're also using user data
Right.
to monetize our service. So it's something that we shouldn't let this go and not care about. And it's something that we should monitor, and it's something we should be conscious of. But it's something, unfortunately, where all the answers aren't anything we know right now, because it's so complicated and multifaceted.
Right. And has the emergence of apps with end-to-end encryption like Signal or WhatsApp affected the ability to collect intelligence, especially in areas where maybe good intelligence inputs are required to make better decisions about security? Or has it just changed the way intelligence is collected?
I am more inclined to go with the second part of your question, in terms of the alternatives of changing the way something is collected. And I'll give an example. And the example I'm going to talk about is something called Tor.
Hmm.
Tor, for those who, some of you might know Tor. If you don't, stands for the Onion Router, TOR. And that is something that you can download as a separate browser, or as an extension in some browsers, and it will effectively scramble the origin point of an IP address for
Hmm.
any kind of web request. So it's going to give someone anonymity
Hmm.
online. But to come back to the second part of what Ankush mentioned, the the thing that happens, though, is, so you've solved one issue. If you're doing something, let's say I'm a criminal, or I'm masterminding some terrorist network, Well, I've solved that problem of can I hide my IP address? But what happens sometimes is people use these forums to talk and they feel more free
Hmm.
and they feel more able to communicate. And often the people like the FBI, they're aware of this.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're actually using
On that. Yeah.
this. So they're using this as well. So the FBI, they've infiltrated some of these awful, I mean, truly
Yeah.
awful stuff like child pornographers. They've used Tor even though they couldn't do it technically because they're there and they're
Hmm.
speaking with these people in these forums. The people, once people talk enough, they slip, they let loose something like an address, a location, etc., and they have actually been able to interdict some of these. And the same thing is true with whether if we're talking terrorism or like huge drug networks, the networks come up against the same problem. They still have to physically commit whatever thing they're trying to do. They can't commit the crime on Tor, and so it's
Yeah.
often other
Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
actually
So I
get them.
think
So
to catch a
yeah,
criminal, you need to think like a criminal.
yes, and criminals don't always get it
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Everybody
criminals
makes
make
mistakes. Yeah,
mistakes.
yeah. So we have a question from Ashwin from the Netherlands. So he asks, how do you see data-driven modeling being regulated? Do you think it's going to form an integrated or required part of the design tool chain in the future?
So the regulation is it's tough to enforce regulation of data driven modeling, and that's not to say it couldn't happen, but it's something that if a company is going to develop a proprietary model, it would be tough to imagine a scenario where the way they build that
Mm,
model could be challenged. Now, for certain types of regulated industries, that's different. So if we're talking about things like medicine and like pharmaceutical testing, that's going to, there can be standards that have to be met
right.
and that
Hmm.
information would have to be submitted. But it's certainly a challenge, and it can there can be problems when it just goes unchallenged. There can be biases in
Right.
models. So like if a model said, yeah, we're not going to send things to people in certain zip codes,
Mm,
that's something that could cause a lot of trouble because that could have a disproportionate impact on different types of people.
mhm. Yeah. So over the past few decades, especially after the IT boom in the 2000s, we saw a large chunk of skilled Indians move to the US, what we call as the brain drain, right? So at the same time, it presumably also took away jobs from Americans as well. So do you think there's a positive side to all of this?
Definitely. So I think there's a few positive sides to this, and I've actually gotten a chance to speak to the person, someone who put me in touch actually with the school. We chatted about this issue through Zoom, and he offered a perspective that as someone who he actually grew up in India and lives in the States now and is now a U.S. citizen
Hmm.
and his family lives in the States. But one thing he mentioned was remittances. So when we look at it from the Indian perspective, and not this is certainly not just India, this would actually
Any
be true
country,
for
yeah.
quite a few
Hmm.
other countries. Yeah, is that workers who come and stay
Hmm.
in the states can send remittances back, and those can actually have a big
Hmm.
impact on people's quality of life. So that's one thing to consider. Another is that with H-1B visas, the H-1B program is written in a way to say that these are going to be jobs that actually aren't these are positions that aren't taking
Mm,
something away from an American worker, but it's a position that an American company can't fill
mm,
domestically. And that's an issue here because of the imbalance in terms of the need for certain technical
right.
skills and
Mm,
the preparation of the
hmm.
workforce.
Hmm.
And that's why you're going to continue to see
Yeah.
The H-1B program flourish, and
Yes.
you're going to see we'll still keep seeing is STEM PhDs are the majority of STEM PhDs awarded in the States are going to people born
Outside of the
outside of the
US.
U.S.
Hmm.
That's not going to change
Hmm.
anytime
Hmm.
soon. So but there's a big benefit to the U.S. And we could see the famous examples, of course. We could look at IIT
Hmm.
and some of the biggest market cap companies in the
Hmm.
S&P, and we can see who's running them, and we can also see more. We can see the influence of things like Indian culture And if you look at in politics, right? So
Right.
who would think, what if our next presidential election is the daughter of a Sikh immigrant against the daughter of a Tamil immigrant? I mean, it actually could happen.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, the
so
vice
we don't know.
president of the United States is someone of Indian origin, so that's very
Yes.
interesting. Yeah.
And the governor, I mean, I don't know if he's still governor, but the governor of Louisiana
Yeah, yeah.
was, yeah, and also South Carolina,
Mhm.
and there's other prominent examples. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely influences. It has a lot of good influences on the U.S.
Yes. So, is there a possibility for a reverse brain drain to happen? Like, can emerging economies like India create opportunities not only for investment, but for talent from developed countries like the United States to come and work here?
I think yes, and I think it's a challenge because you have to overcome people's perceptions of what's
Mm,
the best place to work, what's the best environment to work
right.
in. But there's also, let's think about some advantages. So if you're a multinational company and you're set up, and as quite a few are, you're set up in Bangalore, can you offer something to workers from other countries to incentivize them to want to
Mm,
come there? And there could be all kinds of ways companies could do that. One of them is just think about the purchasing
mhm.
power of using, if they're getting paid
Yeah.
in their local currency.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so that could be part of it. And so I felt like I saw more stories about this why maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I remember seeing a whole bunch of a series of articles in the New York Times specifically about India attracting workers from overseas. And maybe I just haven't picked up on that thread as much lately, but that's an example, and there could be many other such examples that emerge.
I think what's interesting is that the CEOs of a lot of companies based in America are Indians, while we have the CEOs of a lot of companies based in India being non-Indians. You know, we have a lot of American people becoming CEOs of companies here. That's a very interesting thing. And as you said, it's important to incentivize the reason for coming and settling here. Now, uh, of course, we're almost out of time, but let me just try to cover a few more questions here. Now, there's a student, Meghna, who asks, it's quite impressive that you said that a student needs to be satisfied only when they know something. And she asks, will you visit India in the near future so that we students can interact with you directly and get motivated to be more quality conscious?
I would love to. I mean, I don't know when I would be able to. Of course, for the immediate future, I mean,
Yeah,
travel is
yeah.
still such a difficult thing. But it's something I know I would really love to do. And one thing I know I just haven't done is international travel. Not counting the military. I would love to just travel and see places. So that would be something I would certainly love to do.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely. I mean, you would be most welcome to come to our campus and talk to our students sometime because I think it's we've had such a wonderful conversation, and I think having a face-to-face interaction with students is actually very, very different from an online interaction like this because they get to ask questions and open up more better in a better way when they are right in front of you. Now, there's one more question from a viewer called Shubha. She asks, what is the importance of discipline in a civilian's life? Because there's obviously discipline in the
So
military, right? But what's the importance of discipline in a civilian's life?
Well, so to answer that, I'm going to come back to something that Ankush said all the way at the very beginning of this chat. And what he said was that it's those, I'm going to paraphrase what you said because I'm not going to say the words, but it's the small things you do all the time. It's the discipline, it's the work ethic you put in every day that builds you into who you are, and then greatness follows that.
Mhm.
And that's absolutely true. Because nothing's going to happen by magic. And so the discipline is to say this. It's to say, if you want to conquer something and it seems it's going to seem really hard. Suppose, like, let's say we took machine learning, which just the name of it is sort of daunting, but even if we call it statistical learning, it's still extremely wide ranging. It requires statistics, it requires computer science, and it requires domain knowledge all mixed together. So what do you do? So the one thing you could do is you could look at that and say it's too hard, it's too tough. You throw your hands up and you just do nothing.
Right.
The alternative is you say, okay, this looks really hard, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to spend half an hour a day, just half an hour a day. And it's like, think of it like vitamins. Like if you miss a week, you're not going to take 8 vitamins the next day. So if you miss some sessions, you just don't try to make up for it. But just if you spent half an hour a day and you said, I'm going to dedicate myself to understanding statistics, and I'm going to really just know how a regression model is built, and I'm going to really learn about classification tree models, then that discipline would take hold.
Mm.
And what you'd notice, the, the the progress, it wouldn't be exactly linear. What would actually happen is you'd have like periods of time that kind of went like this,
Yeah.
and then you'd have these breakthrough moments.
Hmm.
Yes, exactly, where you'd have these big improvements, just like learning a foreign language, which I'm sure many of you speak different languages at home versus in school, and some of you
I think you
know
speak
quite a few.
Indonesian,
And
right? How did
yes,
that
yes,
happen? I'm
and
just
it's the
sorry
same.
I cut you in between, but uh,
Yeah, well, so what I did, I said, what would if I could just pick a language and I could go and read a newspaper article every day. And this is really me living up to what I just said, because what I said was, look, I'm gonna go on to a local website like Compass, which just is one of their newspapers, or one of their other main sites, or even just the BBC, which has stories in Indonesian. I'm going to read it. Now, you
mm,
might say, well, that's crazy. You don't know it. How could you read it? Well, I can't. But I can look at it and I can start to say, okay, well, what's this word? What's that
mm,
word? And I will translate and,
hmm,
in dictionary. So I start to say, okay, I'm going to actually learn the vocabulary. And so I just did that day after day after day, and it's a habit I still keep up, is reading something, just reading one newspaper article a day in
mm.
Indonesian. And so it works, because eventually my vocabulary is more towards like government and economics. But even some day-to-day conversation I could do.
Right,
I'm certainly not fluent,
right.
but it's the same approach.
That's wonderful. I think as we come to the end of this the interview, I think I must say that uh, discipline, consistency, hard work, determination, these are all contributors to success in life. And definitely moving ahead, we need to be aware of where we stand and what we need to do to go ahead in life. With this, any parting thoughts to the students, students of the ages 16, 17? What do you think they should keep in mind going ahead? They would be entering college soon. And what is something that you would say to yourself at that age? And what do you think students should know?
What I want to say, so what I want to say to all of you is that if you don't feel like you know what you want to do in 10 years, or if you feel confused, that's good, right? Like, that's the part of the path of being your age. And so you don't want to be so confused that you're just spinning in a circle. You want to be at the day-to-day level, you want to be doing what you should be. You want to be focused on the things around you. What are your academic commitments and requirements, and then extracurricular as well. But don't worry about not having your whole life plan figured out, because you have a lot of time for that. And you realize that as you get older. I mean, I turned 40 this year, so I've start to realize, okay, now I'm not like young anymore, and I can now say with that older wisdom, I guess, that you have time to figure those things out. So let that run its course, and just know that a lot of times the path to success is not always a completely straight line.
Right. So, of course, I said that would be our parting question, but there is one viewer question that which we will take last. This is Santosh from Atlanta. He asks, what should college graduates need to know while entering the job market post coronavirus?
Okay, so post coronavirus, just know that the different environments, the company culture of whatever job you're going into has been has been shifted. It has, you're going to have to just figure out two things. One is what's the what's the what is the culture of this company that I'm coming into, and then secondly, how much do I have to filter recent events to
Mhm.
understand that? And so what I would say, and this is something I would say, COVID or no COVID, when you go in somewhere, when you're starting off new, I'm going to use a statistical term here. I want your null hypothesis to be that whatever thing your company is doing it makes sense. Now hold on. I'm not saying you just have to sit down, shut up, and go along because everything around you is right. It's not always right. When you see something that you think could be improved, changed, or something should be altered, you prove it.
Right.
Prove it. But just like in statistics, you have to really, when you have an alternative hypothesis, you have to really go out of your way to demonstrate
Right.
that. But I would say otherwise, when you're starting off somewhere, focus more on absorbing what they do and not always assuming that they're doing something dumb or wrong. Sometimes there's a reason. And so I think I see the young people cross that line from confidence to arrogance is when people don't do that and they just assume something's wrong because they don't like it right away. And I know I took a little bit of a detour from Santosh's question, but I just want to add that to anybody who's entering the
Right.
workforce.
It was wonderful chatting with you today because I think I did not really realize how much time had passed. We covered a lot of topics, and thank you so much for coming on to this program and sharing your thoughts and motivating our viewers. So thank you so much.
Ankush, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody who put questions in, and it was great to chat with you.
Dear viewers, with this, we come to the end of this season of EduPath. If you have missed any of our earlier episodes, you can watch them again on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to the channel as well, and you can also listen to the episodes as a podcast on all your favorite platforms. Keep following us on Facebook and Instagram for updates, and we will come back with the season two soon. Until then, goodbye and thank you.